Kendra and I were just keen to sort of try and communicate something about what we were trying to do with this new experimental chatter format. It's our kind of new way of trying to get people closer to the drawings, to sort of use them as a context or a sort of pretext for conversation, as Neil was saying. And to sort of that end, it's been great to work with Richard over the last 6 months maybe of conversations, some of which happened here in the archive, looking at the drawings together, us sort of pulling out things that we thought would align with Richard's sensibilities, but maybe sort of things that he might not have seen as well, that might kind of dovetail with them too. So the result of that is this quite, as you'll have seen if you've walked around, this quite eclectic selection of drawings, and it's certainly a kind of grouping that we've never done before, and in the sort of drawing matter style, they'll never be put together like this again. So it's very much a kind of ephemeral kind of moment. It was an interesting afternoon today, I think, for Kendra and I, who had sort of prepared this selection online to see it in person and to try and get things to make some sense with each other and get things to have some kind of friction with each other too, which was really nicely helped by some of these photographs that Richard sent us over the last couple of days that we've printed out on the A4 sheets. There's a few scattered around the room, and under the Aldo Rossi drawing at the back there is a little table with some stacks of these, which you're welcome to take away with you and do with what you please. But I think what we just wanted to emphasize is that today we've put these drawings together to stimulate conversation, kind of around themes about demography and the post-war city and opportunities. There's a sort of London focus in some places. There's sort of moments relating to art and the public realm and sculpture. And then there's a kind of little vein of tools and how things are made. But we quickly realized when we were assembling the tables that these categories all broke down very, very fast, and none of these objects just fit into one of these categories. So yeah, we hope that will sort of be interesting and provocative. And just to say a little bit about the format of this evening, after Richard has done his introduction and introduced his 4 guests, we'll let you go back to the chattering that you're already doing. And we just wanted to encourage you to sort of meet people that you haven't met before and maybe try and strike up conversation with people who you might not do that if you weren't in this situation. And just to say, we have a little bell that we can't find currently, but about 10 minutes before the end we'll ring that to sort of last orders for the drawings.
I feel like a fraud most days. I feel like a fraud here tonight because I've been very near the education of architects. I've been near architects, and I'm old enough to see that as quite a kind of corridor of talent, and a word that I find very hard to use, which is professionalism. Because obviously the thing that distinguishes architecture is that it's a profession. And I'm making a play at the moment to stop, or to loosen the way we talk about things and accept that maybe everybody here and our friends are really from the display arts. And once upon a time, art schools were rather flat, open, porous places in which you could not know what you were doing. You might meet a fellow student who did not know what they were doing. They might have gone off and started a band, or they might have had an advisor or a tutor or whatever who said, don't worry about it, it'll sort itself out. So somewhere there's a double funnel. I don't know where it is. Can anyone see a double funnel? It'd be better if I held that. So there are people here who know really how unprofessional I am. So just save that for later, please. At a certain moment, I had a proper job in Oxford, and it was running what really is a kind of cell called the Ruskin. Very small. Most people with proper jobs in Oxford often wouldn't even know that it existed. I often felt that the students weren't really respected. Students, of course, had a hotel to stay in, their college. And they were, in my experience, an extremely distinct group of people. But the problem with us is that the rumour always goes before us. So all these people would turn up who expected to get a place in Oxford, and me and half a dozen other people would have to entertain these energetic, well brought up, perfectly able, often rather formulaic people I think we used to do the interviews very fairly, and often say, I think you should go away, you're so metropolitan, you should stay in London, Paris, New York, whatever. And we would gather people in a slightly farmyard kind of way, and I think history proved that we sort of did that quite well. And I don't want to make any claim for that. There's lots of other people putting the work in. Anyway, one year I remember it was expected that I would go and meet the new students, and I made this, which is now very tired because it's probably about 20 years old. And the point I made was that people arriving in education arrive in a funnel, and they may already know what colour they are or whatever, and they then go through something here which is called education, and then they leave and they disperse. There was more dispersal before. And I remember talking about it. I don't think anyone's ever mentioned it to me since, and it was sort of funny that this has turned up. But I think that's this is not an entirely mature group of people, but I'm nervous that the average age might be over 50. But I think the point about being young is how could you possibly know who you were? And that, of course, is very frightening, or very exhilarating. And through the act of not staying young, you slowly work out who you might be. And if you're lucky, probably in that period you meet a few people who are equally confused or muddled. And then you disperse into the world and you stay in contact with them. So some of you may recognise what I'm trying to say. There's lots of things I brought knocking about which are kind of slightly argumentative. And I think they're also because I'm trying to cover up the fact that I don't come from drawing. I'm not that kind of artist. I wish I was. But I understand that funny aspect of trying to turn a thought into something, which we all do even when we speak to each other. So in my experience, I've had huge amounts of support from Marina. How did you do that? You were there. Anyway, this is Marina Warner, who she doesn't know this, but I actually saw Marina Warner when she was 13, but I'm going to tell that story to her later. And who was very supportive because she, sort of 30 years ago, entertained some of my insecurities, let's say, and then reassembled them into thoughts. So taught me lots of stuff, as you taught lots of people.
This is absolute nonsense, Richard.
Well, it's what I think.
I just listened to you.
So this is Marina. This is Rowan Moore, who I decided who I decided was so reserved that I would befriend him. And I've never done that with anybody, but it's been quite a good project. And so we're friends, and Rowan has the task of writing about architecture regularly, and usually I think reminds you that it's complex. And Roger Malbert, who I made a show with for the touring show for the Hayward Gallery called Thinking Aloud, and I think there's a catalogue here, which was a little bit like this evening. It was, I would say something to Roger, and Roger would say, "You can't exhibit that," or "Where would you find one?" And then over a year, quite a long time, we found lots and lots of things that we all sort of know about, but maybe don't often see. I did have a patent document for a slinky 4 months before I'm born, 1947. Beautiful, beautiful American drawing, of course, of I'm going to put this on the market, and a certain generation of children are going to have these going up and down their stairs. And anyway, I could have brought too many things. So you'll find things on the tables that are irresponsible in some way, sometimes a little bit intimate, including my mistake of bringing one of my wife's books and being told that's my book, but still, it's a good book, and it's called Origins, and it's by Eric Partridge. And if you haven't got it, get it, because you just look up a word and you go, I cannot believe that this word travelled like this, and we use it. It's in our speech. But what was happening before any of us spoke was that everybody was talking to everybody. So I think what is really important is that when you're in a kind of open, it's not a museum, we're not there aren't labels, we're not in a show, we're not going to take it home and write an essay, that it allows everybody to say, who are you, to the person next door to you. And I wanted there to be even more young people, but you can't reduce everyone's age just like that. But I think it's important that everybody remembers that you did start here, and you have mostly been through here, and you are now here.
One of the things that was very remarkable about listening to Richard when I was writing an essay about him is that he really does open your eyes to the phrase I hardly knew at the time, to the built environment. I mean, there's a real sensitivity to the relationship of buildings to where they stand, and I think that not to be critical of Neil, but I think one of the difficulties for architectural drawings is that they tend to have a subject which is a focus, whereas actually Richard's mind works in continual contingency. There's always relationship at the heart of it, and some drawings show that relationship, but on the whole they single out an element of a building or an element of a design, and they don't actually concentrate so much on what I think you have a particular flair for, which is the way the moving object ourselves, moving through a landscape, experiences it in a sort of almost cubist way with lots and lots of overlapping bits. And I think what I learned from you was a kind of the practice of living in an urban area. I mean, the way it relates to the French theorists, it relates to Derive, to Guy Debord, and also to Certeau, and the whole idea of that we make a place through our memories and our experiences of it. And the architects have a very difficult job, because they're making new buildings which so far haven't got that archaeological depth of memories.
I'm not a well-organised person, and I found, or I think one of my sons found, a folder which was sent to me in 1996 of all the geology under Tate Modern. So I knew a little bit I knew that Tate Modern was likely to happen, didn't know what it was going to be called. So I found this pile of drawings, which of course are absolutely amazing because a lot of them are the geology of the whole of that part of London. And you're reminded what London's made of, and you're reminded how difficult it is to work London. Who works London? Mostly the Irish. Does anybody, Irish, if you speak to Irish people and you say that, they go, yes, thank you for noticing. But mostly that's not in the collective conversation. But then, and I didn't ask for these two to go together, and it's obviously this is shapery. But yesterday I was talking in fluent Moldovan to a Moldovan scaffolder. I know how to say thank you in Romanian, which does work in Moldovan. And he was showing me this tool, which some of you will recognize. So it's a thick aluminium triangle with markings on it and a loose piece which can work its way around. So it's a broadly speaking, I would say it's a roofer's tool for marking and making things. And he said to me, and you'll forgive me if you're Moldovan, but he said, Pythagoras. And I went, fuck, I don't know what he's talking about. And I went, oh, he said Pythagoras. So I, took my risk and said, yes, Pythagoras. We grew up with that. And we then had a kind of quite animated conversation on either side of the scaffold barrier. And then he told a lovely story about somebody on a site in Ireland who couldn't do the ends of the rafters. They didn't understand that you have to have a consistent pattern, that you need to know which angle you're working at. And he gave him the tool. And he then told a sort of almost classic I sell my labour joke about the other lot. So he did the Moldovan versus the Irishman, and he even used a slightly Irish accent as he told it. And it involved the Irishman saying, this is no fucking good, and throwing it and snapping the end off, which I said, well, that's Pythagoras, the missing bit. And he said, so I picked up a large piece of wood and threw it at him and missed. So it was a story, it's just complete pathos. There's nothing really happened. But that tool is invested with that, and I think that's slightly what you're talking about, is that I will see this man again and I will ask to have a look at his Pythagoras tool. But I love the fact that whoever printed this today put it together with the groundworks. And I've just sort of a really wicked thing to say. The groundworks at what became Tate Modern. And Nick Sirota's dad was a structural engineer. And I once said to Nick, did he take you on site? Meaning, because Nick is extremely sensitive to buildings. And he said, yes, but you couldn't see anything. And I thought that's just an odd thing. And I said, what do you mean? He said, he did underground structures. He did the underground work. And I said, oh, like you. And I thought, I said it. It's a compliment. Anyway, I hope you are all irreverent with each other and find out who each other is and enjoy being here, because it's amazing.
This is sort of like an Easter egg hunt where everything's an Easter egg, and you don't know when you found them. But I was just thinking, from what Marina was saying about how you observe built environment very acutely all the time. But the thing you really like observing are the unintended, undesigned things, almost always. And here we're in a room full of intent. Because what is a drawing if it's not leading to something which the architect hopes will happen? So that's an observation really, but I'm also interested in how you respond, given the task of looking at intended things rather than unintended things. How is that a different kind of experience, or how you choose one thing and not another thing? Which you don't have to answer that question, of course, but
Well, everybody here is supporting themselves one way or another. You're leaning against something, or your left leg hurts, or your, in my case, the lower back. And we stand up, and it's a great privilege to stand up. And everybody does it in their own way. And only when something's not quite right do you realise how privileged that is. So I don't really ever see the incidental as being that incidental, because it's in a nominally designed space in which countless eventualities happen, where the dog takes a poo, the crisp packet gets blown, the Thames Water digs a hole, the bus gets delayed. The stuff of being a human in a city. So mostly what I can't help seeing is really just the school of unintended consequences, is people who, at its most obvious, the doorstop, or this, I live in a sort of slightly would-be bourgeois street off the Caledonian Road, and there was a bomb in the street in, I would guess, 1940-41, and they rebuilt that part of the street after the war with two-storey prison officer houses, when prison officers had houses near Pentonville Prison. And there's an architect who's living there called Julian, and Julian is an incredibly good gardener and really knows about gardening. And in amongst his plants on the wall yesterday was this, to my way of seeing, a very 1970s New York tool, because they didn't have plasterboard, they had sheetrock, and they made big surfaces, and they knew what a 10x5 was, whereas we only knew an 8x4, and it just had this little sign on it. It just said, "Please take." And
Can you show it to us down here?
oh, so sorry, down there. Anyway, it'll be back on the table, but so I mean, I feel slightly absurd saying this, but walking along the street, of course I noticed it because it was out of place. It's also probably recognised that it was kind of had a sort of reliquary beauty. It's been used a lot and it's carrying all its marks of use. And then this little anonymous but personal instruction. And I suppose it's a bit cheesy because I probably thought I might bring that tonight, but as a rule I'm not doing that. I'm not sending, I mean I'm in touch with a very small group of people, about a dozen people, where I might send you a picture and you might write back, or but mostly it's private. Sorry.
I think that what you said, Rowan, is the two are connected by an interest in human ingenuity. I mean, Richard's fascination with tools of all kinds is because he's interested in how. That's why the exhibition was called Thinking Aloud, because it was about this capacity to think ingeniously. And I think that does actually unite some of these drawings. What your point about intentionality, intentional, shows that they were products of the same sort of ingenuity that creates a barrier by putting two mops across to, say that keep out.
Yeah, but we read them, yes.
But the sort of, what the typical architectural drawing does is not really talk about this, except very indirectly. And it doesn't really talk about the unintended consequences. These drawings are generally devoid of unintended consequences.
Yeah.
and they don't, so a building is a kind of stage in a series of human interactions which starts with the making of it and continues with the inhabitation of it. Whereas architects like to portray their buildings as kind of fixed in time at this point. And I don't know really where I'm going with this, as you were saying earlier, I don't know what I'm doing, it's like your students. But so I wonder how you, when you see something like this, which is very sort of, this is the law courts in the Strand, I think, is that right?
Yeah, it is.
It's a very formal, composed drawing. Is that the opening ceremony or something like that?
It doesn't say so, but it looks like it. Yeah.
So that's after all
Shall I
the
just
work
say
of-
something about it?
Yes.
It's,
So
sorry,
what
should just say that
And
it's
it
there
goes with
because
this.
it goes with Jury Colar's crumpled version.
So yes. So tell us about what attracts
So
you to these drawings.
I'm sure there's nothing remarkable about what I'm about to say, is that you didn't mention this, but obviously I know, this is Cedric?
Yes. This is Cedric Price's Battersea
Uptown.
Power Station drawing.
Upturned table, and I realised that when I was a child there probably were only 2 chimneys. Somewhere around the 40s it became 4 chimneys. So the very typical English thing, we can run to 2 chimneys now, we might do 2 later. I don't know what the story is, but and we know about Battersea now. It's taken most of my lifetime. I was actually in Battersea Power Station on the last day it worked with Julian Opie in April 1982. Separate conversation. But I identify much more with that kind of note. I completely respect this, but I also know that this is not even twice my age ago. So when I see that, I just think of the sheer economic power that was available in London to even behave like that. To go, we'd be mostly Gothic, but we'll mix it up with a bit of this, and by the way, somebody's just designed a plumbing system, and we could even have toilets, and so there's an incredible complexity. We're not in it's not Flemish, and I have a tendency to historicise things. I have a tendency to want to know how they were made, when they were made, by what sort of person. How did that? There's a book of uniforms here, which I need to remind myself constantly that class is just the short version of the word classification, and you better know who the admiral is, because they might actually know how to get the ship to the coast. But if the admiral doesn't know who the people are down at the bottom, ship won't work. So there's a long story, which there are people here much more qualified to talk about than I am. But when I see this, I feel that weight, that utter weight. And I've actually been involved in a court case in there once, which I'm not going to discuss publicly, but fucking frightening, because it just visits all that kit on whoever is in there. But Roger's point is, which I think you should probably speak to, is that I think there's a detective thing going on here where Neil told me that he found this and then sort of detectivized it and went, I think this is going to be at the law courts. So I think this was bought.
Yes, to complement, I'm sure it was.
Exactly.
And this, Jury Kolar was a Czech sort of conceptual artist who was both a poet and as an artist had various devices for collage. He used to cut up, slice up many versions of the postcard and juxtapose them. And he went, I'm just telling Richard, I think I read it on Neil's, on the website actually, the Drawing Lab of the website, maybe not. If you go to prison in Czechoslovakia for a collage that I think it was it might have been a poem that was by him that was found in somebody's flat in Soviet period Czechoslovakia. So this is and he for 3 months he was in jail. And then he was expelled from Czechoslovakia and spent the rest of his life in Paris. But he did live to see the fall of the Czech of the Soviet regime. So this has got a lot. It's an example, I guess, of what I think is true about a lot of these drawings and things. That they have a very particular history. They're rooted in history and all that we need to know, basically. So,
I mean, you've actually created 2 wonderful books about drawing. None of them about buildings.
No.
So, but I think we're looking at most of the drawings. Not only, I mean, we just looked at the print, but a print that had been handled in a sort of drawing type way. I think it'd be interesting for you to tell us a bit more about what is happening when people draw, what they're finding out, how it is a kind of form of thought.
Well, when Richard and I started work on thinking aloud, I remember that it was with one immediate point of departure was an exhibition that happened at the V&A called On the Back of an Envelope. And it was about first sketches and first thoughts and initial ideas, precisely the kind of thing which is very intended, but is somebody doodling something which then turns ultimately into a building or a machine. And so that was the beginning of that project. So it was directly grounded in purpose. It was purposeful in a way, but it was it expanded in many different directions. As an exhibition, I think in the catalog, you say things have a resonance. That was what appealed to you about everything there. Some things were drawings, some things nothing to do with drawing. But there are drawings here by artists, which has struck me have a different sort of status. I mean, we were talking about this before we gathered. But somehow the artist drawings, not necessarily particular ones here, but artists do a drawing and it's regarded as an autonomous thing of its own, with its own justification, and it might be appreciated and put in a frame, but it stands on its own terms, and it somehow stands outside of history in a way, where it then belongs to the history of drawing. And you can put, everybody who's worked with historical drawings knows that you can put, with trans-historical drawings, you can put an old master drawing next to a contemporary drawing almost, in a way which is quite seamless and comfortable, and in a way that you couldn't put a Baroque painting, which next to a contemporary wash drawing. It may be the same medium, maybe it's pencil or maybe wash, and so on. So I think that's one thing that struck me about this collection. That everything here has a very particular place, is located in time, and you need to know really what it's to fully appreciate it. Did you feel that's true of a lot of things here? I'm just reading the histories behind these 2 drawings here, which are by an artist, in fact, by Tangley, the Swiss anarchistic self-destructive machines he specialized in. And this was, these drawings were lithographs, I think, aren't they actually? They were drawn for,
yes, lithograph,
for a monument in Milan. Very phallic, funny enough.
They remind me of Klaus Oldenburg.
They're very like,
who did make it.
These are very gestural. And I mean, things, Christo as well, the sculptors who made big projects, often they subsidize them, and Christo did fund his projects through his drawings. So there's a close relationship in a way, but it's a very different relationship to an architect's.
Well, we were talking about having conversations about drawings, and that's the whole point of the evening.
Yeah.
And an architectural drawing is always part of a conversation. Originally, that it's made to be part of a conversation between the architect and the client, the architect and the builder, the architect and planners, architects and each other,
yes.
Architects and themselves. So when you look at an architectural drawing on its own, you have to sort of imagine that all those conversations that preceded it and came after. So again, I don't know where this is going, but that's part of the experience of looking at it.
Yes.
You're looking at a tiny slice of a whole universe of people and activities that you just have to kind of imagine and guess at.
I mean, one of the things that's certainly happened in my lifetime is that the geometry of architecture has changed because of
Yes.
computers.
Yeah.
So that actually, when Frank Gehry died and we saw some of his drawings, they could only be turned into buildings because of the power of the computer to realise these shapes. And Zaha Hadid is the same. Zaha Hadid actually for quite a long time didn't have any buildings built.
No, she imagined. This is probably known to many people here, but yeah, so she started off doing paintings of imaginary projects that were painted by hand. And I remember people thinking that they were computer drawings. I remember people who didn't like her, saying, this work is, but who had only seen her work in reproduction, said, oh, this is so sterile, it's all done by computer. But it wasn't, it was all done by hand with a great level of work and skill. And so in a way, she showed how kind of imagination can precede technology.
But this really does fit with what Richard is interested in. The tools follow the desire for a certain kind of shape or form.
Could I just add something about Zaha?
Yeah.
That those drawings to her, they existed. They were architecture.
Yeah,
And that often with a drawing, the architect can believe that those spaces exist. And the drawing, in a way, is a vehicle to convey that sense of space to somebody else, maybe who is going to pay for it, or somebody who's interested about the way the city evolves. And I just want to add the fact that the architectural drawing can have its own reality. It doesn't necessarily need to be built to be purposeful.
Yeah.
But it sort of comes into being. I mean, eventually.
Well, she had lots of goes at it. She also was in a privileged position to be able to afford to have loads of people around her that would continue to kind of develop. And then eventually, of course, she wanted to build. She wanted to build like mad, so she kept doing competition. So in a competition, which is a very interesting conversation, what is the role of the drawing? Because it has to appeal to the judges. And as we know, sometimes competition winners were thought to be somebody else that was perhaps a prestigious architect, but in reality was an unknown person. So, you know, the architectural drawing has various purposes: purpose for the builder, purpose for a publication in a book about changing ideas about the city and architecture. But they're not just construction necessarily, or leading to construction. The construction is not necessarily the part in which the uniqueness of that thing is conceived.
There's one drawing here by an artist called Constant, Dutch Cobra artist, who in the 50s was a brilliant painter and painted like an animal almost. He used to go to Amsterdam.
He painted on top of other people's paintings.
He did that as well a bit later, but his first very expressive drawings are very much grounded in the belief that we should draw like children. Stripped back, civilization had totally screwed up World War II, and this was in 1948, 49. He was an amazing painter, but then he became interested in architecture. He invented a utopian fantasy city. It was nobody ever attempted to realize it, but this looks a bit like an architect's drawing. It's boring, in fact, compared with his own earlier
So
work.
you were saying it was a mode of representation.
He really was envisaging.
Acquired.
He was planning, he called it Babylon City, this project.
Yes,
he was inspired by coming to London in the 50s and was struck by how boring and ugly the new buildings that were coming up after the war were. And he wanted
that tradition has continued, hasn't it?
Yes, exactly right. It was ahead of his time.
Could I make a suggestion? I'm really conscious that some people probably haven't seen everything.
Yeah.
Since everybody now knows who these guys are, what if we let you loose on the room and that everybody can move around and see the things that they haven't seen, because I'm very conscious that this didn't just land here. This is, dare I say, authored? Anyway, you well, where's
No, I just
Matt?
had the nice.
Yeah. So I mean, in a way, I would like to honour the fact that people have opened drawers, found things, put them out, and not everybody has seen everything. So if we do that for X, yeah, and then you now know who these people are and what they're good for. So
Ask them questions.
Can I just say one thing, which is Martha has pulled out some very early Zaha meditations. Just to
because we're where we are, a drawer has been opened with early Zaha.